There's a reason people so often get nervous about the idea of a remake or a remaster of one of their favorite games, because for all of the examples of excellent remakes and remasters over the years, there have been just as many examples of those that have completely messed things up in the worst way possible, tarnishing the legacy of a beloved game. Here, we're going to talk about a few such examples. Silent Hill HD Collection. Never has there been a more infuriating example of a remaster that completely misses the point of what makes the original game so good. Silent Hill has always been about the atmosphere, and the visual changes made to the HD collection did everything in their power to completely destroy that. From the almost complete removal of something as crucial to the experience as the mist, to the baffling lack of improvements made to character models, objects, and environments. WARCRAFT 3 Reforged. Probably one of the easiest and most obvious picks for a list such as this one. In all their wisdom, Blizzard Entertainment decided to completely nuke the original WARCRAFT 3 off the face of the earth to make way for this remaster, and then followed that up with a game that barely even worked. Poorly implemented gameplay changes crippled the core experience. A bevy of technical issues plagued every second of the experience, and many features that had been promised pre-launch were missing. Not only did WARCRAFT 3 Reforged ruin the legacy of one of the greatest PC games of all time, it somehow managed to retroactively ruin the experience itself. Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. When a Metal Gear Solid game gets criticized for its overwrought, overdone cutscenes, you know it's done something terribly wrong. Twin Snakes cutscenes were too over the top, even for Metal Gear, which is really saying something, and that, combined with lackluster voice acting, meant that MGS1's story and storytelling, arguably the most important part of the original, ended up feeling very downgraded. Grand Theft Auto: The Trilogy: The Definitive Edition. You probably saw this one coming. The most recent release from this group of games is also one of the most high-profile failures. Taking the mobile versions of 3 all-time classics and using those as the base for the remasters was baffling enough. But add to that some shoddy AI upscaling and a shockingly cavalier approach to remastering that took away so many of the tiny details that made these games what they were, GTA: The Trilogy has ended up disappointing a large number of people. Bully Scholarship Edition. Though its transgressions weren't quite as severe as the GTA trilogy, Bully Scholarship Edition was a pretty disappointing remaster as well. The new content was certainly appreciated, but the game was a bit of a technical mess. Numerous bugs and glitches, weird character models, crashes, locks, you name it. Not quite what people had in mind when they were clamoring for Rockstar to go back to this cult classic. 13, 2020. The original 13 isn't exactly an all-time great, but it most certainly is a cult classic, and if you've played it, it's not hard to understand why it has such a devoted fanbase. The 2020 remake, sadly, felt like a slap in the face to that entire fanbase. From its cheap approximation of the original's distinct style and aesthetic, to the terrible gunplay and the brain-dead AI, to the flood of technical glitches, 2020's 13 was an absolute mess of a game that should never have been made. Resident Evil 3 2020. Where the first 2 Resident Evil games got stellar remakes, the third one sadly was treated with a disappointing modernization. On its own, the 2020 RE3 remake is a good enough game, but it's hard to view a remake, especially this one, without any context. Not only did it feel like a significant step down from 2019's RE2 remake in how it handled the whole stalker enemy mechanic, made all the more egregious by the fact that the stalker enemy was Nemesis, it also failed to do justice to the original RE3 itself, thanks to crucial and beloved content being cut out, and even the beloved Mercenaries mode being left out of the package. GoldenEye 007 2010. GoldenEye 007 will forever be one of the best and most influential games ever made, and while the idea of a modern ground-up remake of the classic may have seemed exciting at first, that all came tumbling down when the remake actually released. Why? Well, because other than that name, it had absolutely nothing in common with the original, and instead felt like a cheap knockoff of one of the hundreds of hyper-linear cinematic shooters that were flooding the market at the time. Talk about missing the point. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater HD. The Tony Hawk franchise was mismanaged for a long period of time, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater HD was one of its lowest lows, which is saying something given how low the series sank when it was at its worst. Pulling elements from the first two games as it did, the game needed to be the absolute best at what it was doing, which couldn't have been further from the case, with features and mechanics that were considered series staples being left out, and even the core gameplay experience feeling clunky and just plain unenjoyable. Thankfully, 2020's remakes did a significantly better job of modernizing the original classics. Resident Evil 6 HD. Resident Evil 6 in and of itself is a terrible game with little to no redeeming qualities, so even a solid remaster couldn't have done much to fix this broken mess. RE6 HD, however, was far from a solid remaster. It was, instead, a lazy up-res patch disguised as a remastered launch, which touched up the game's visuals in the most basic ways possible, doing little more than the bare minimum, and at times, not even that. Super Mario 3D All-Stars. Nintendo's track record with remasters has been widely inconsistent over the years, and 2020's Super Mario 3D All-Stars is definitely one of their more controversial efforts. From a visual and technical perspective, all three remasters played things way too safe, while basic improvements that players had expected would be made were bafflingly ignored. No alternative was provided at first for Super Mario Sunshine's requirements of analog triggers, though thankfully this at least was eventually fixed. The fact that Nintendo decided to release this as a limited-time collection both physically and digitally made it that much more controversial. Dead Rising Chop Till You Drop. For whatever reason, when Capcom decided that they'd bring the original Dead Rising to the Wii with a remake, they decided to do it by any means necessary, even if it meant compromising the quality of the core experience. In Dead Rising Chop Till You Drop, players had a smaller pool of weapons to play around with. Several features from the original were missing. The mall itself was significantly smaller, the movement was completely ruined. The simple act of playing the game felt clumsy and unenjoyable. And that's not what you want in a Dead Rising game, or any game for that matter. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time Reshelled. TMNT was ruling the roost with a couple of excellent beat-em-ups in the days of the arcade, but the legacy of Turtles in Time, a veritable classic in its own right, was completely ruined by its 2009 remake. Turtles in Time Reshelled may have cleaned up the visuals nicely, but in deciding to stay completely faithful to the arcade classic, it ended up feeling too simplistic, too low budget, and too, well, boring. Mafia 2 Definitive Edition. Mafia 2 has its fair share of plans, but even the original game was not without its issues. The remaster we got in 2020 did nothing but strengthen the game's critical reception. It was a shockingly unambitious remaster, one that felt more like a lazy up-res more than anything else. Beyond that, the game was plagued by constant performance issues, technical glitches, audio bugs, and much, much more. If you want to play Mafia 2, you'd be better served just going back to the 2010 original. Ghostbusters the Video Game Remastered. Ghostbusters the Video Game Remastered is an experience from another era, whose design has not aged well, whose visuals are years behind, and which only presents a good experience to die-hard fans of the franchise. CRYSIS Remastered. CRYSIS Remastered's visual upgrades are rather inconsistent, and as most fans of the original will tell you, the fact that the remaster is based on the console port rather than the PC original does it no favors. Of course, more than a few fans have also expressed their disappointment at the fact that the remaster doesn't include the Warhead expansion. That's all for now. If you enjoy what you saw, please hit the like button, and if you're new to the channel, now is a great time to subscribe. We upload brand new videos every single day. After subscribing, don't forget to enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you next time, right here on Gaming Bolt.